Welcome to Don't Say Adulting. It's the show where we seek out advice from friends, family, and professionals on the daily tasks of adulthood. Hey guys, welcome back to Don't Say Adulting. I'm now joined in the studio today by Ryan Broussard, our student intern here at Grotto. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I thought I'd bring you in to co-host this episode because if you guys didn't look at the title before clicking on this, we're talking about grad school, talking about should I go to graduate school, more to be more specific. And I thought being on the undergrad side, we're kind of representing most sides of like people deciding to go to grad school, being a few years out of college or thinking about doing it immediately after undergrad, which I think you've even expressed a desire to maybe go to grad school.
Yeah, it's something I'm interested in, thinking about going into teaching after school. So it's sort of on my radar. It's something I'm interested in, exploring.
Yeah. What do you think is your biggest question or worry about grad school? The thing that's making you think it might not be the path or...
I've heard a lot of things like don't ever pay to go to grad school. I think that's something that's very sort of in the business realm or engineering. I think my biggest question is, or like worry is, am I making a mistake by going to grad school? I think I hear these stories of, oh, I wish I didn't go to grad school. I wish I would have learned more if I just went out into the workplace.
Yeah.
So I want to learn more about, is grad school something that's really worth my time and my money?
Yeah, I feel like, and I think hopefully we'll get into this in the episode too, that there seems to be a big division on postgraduate education. There's professional programs where you're often just expected to pay because that's what you want to do. And you need a law degree to be a lawyer, or you need a medical degree to be a doctor. So it's like, and that's going to pay dividends in the end. So you're like, okay, I'll invest now.
Yeah.
But for those sort of, and then there's the educational, becoming a professor, pursuing academia route, where it's, you're doing it for the love of the game, you know?
Yep.
And then there's this in between where there's a lot of careers. I feel like an MBA might even fall into this. I don't know. Maybe our guest will know more, where it's like, will it pay you back? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it could. Should you pay to go if that's the case?
Exactly.
And I think I have the same fears about graduate school. And maybe it's just because I spend so much time on a college campus, but often I find myself looking out the window and being like, I should go back to school. But I don't know if that's the right instinct, you know?
Yeah.
I also feel like one thing when I was trying to prepare for this episode is that the undergraduate market is getting so flooded. Like everybody has a bachelor's now. It's almost the new high school degree.
Yeah. Everyone's saying that now the graduate degree is the undergrad.
Yeah.
So
and so like to stand out. Yeah.
Exactly.
You have to like get a grad degree. Is that necessary? Actually from the US Census Bureau, apparently I think this is from 2020, about 44.4% of Americans have bachelor's degrees, which is kind of a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And another stat, this is not from the Census Bureau, but another stat that was looking more into graduate education was saying that more and more jobs are actually requiring graduate degrees to apply. Some estimates put it at about like 27% of jobs, which is like, I think triple from like the 70s. So I think there is that, like you said, pressure of, is a graduate degree going to get me ahead career-wise? Not even the part of like being interested in going. Because I think we've already seen that in the undergraduate market. Even if you don't want to go to college.
Yeah, it's kind of, you go and, you find what you want to do.
Yeah.
So.
And then for me, I'm worried it's just, there's this, I think it's a College Humor sketch, a really old one. They're all pretty old. About graduate school, and it's framed as this parody of an ad for graduate school, and it's just about not wanting to start your life.
Yeah.
So you just put it off by going to graduate school. And I'm worried that's me. I don't know.
We'll find out when we have our lovely guest.
Yeah, and today we're bringing on Evan Gage again. You may remember him from such episodes as How Do You Make Friends After College? Where he came to kind of give some advice on making friends. Here, I thought I'd bring him back again because actually, before he started his business and just became a local professional friend maker, he worked at the Flatley Center for Undergraduate Scholarly Engagement here at Notre Dame, which is basically a group on campus referred to as Qs that assists undergrads who are seeking postgraduate education, research opportunities as an undergraduate, or grants and scholarships. pertaining to either undergraduate or graduate research. So he assisted people in forming their application and deciding where they want to go. So I thought, there's actually some professional direction there.
Yeah.
Maybe he can help both of us out. So stay tuned. Don't leave. We'll all be back here with Evan Gage once again on Don't Say Adulting. Welcome back to Don't Say Adulting. I hope you didn't go anywhere because we being me and Ryan, previously established, are now joined by our very special guest, Evan Gage.
Hey.
How's it going?
Oh, it's good. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, last time we had you on and we mentioned this for how to make friends after college.
Yeah.
Now we're going to maybe talk about how to make money after
Right.
possibly.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Clout. Yeah. Notoriety in academic communities.
Yeah. Well, the question that really sparked this, and I think I mentioned this to you, was should you go to grad school? Not really a how, but more of a should, sort of in that Jurassic Park sense, the
Right.
Goldblum line about we often just think about can we? We never stop to think should we?
Yeah.
And that's what I really want to talk about today.
Absolutely. Those are two separate steps. There is one must discern should before getting into the nitty-gritty of how, and I do believe it is a vital step to think about the should.
Yeah. And you have been to grad school in addition to actually assisting other people in going to grad school.
Yeah.
You were paid to do that.
I was paid to do that. Yeah, exactly.
Here at the Flatley Center for Undergraduate Scholarly Engagement.
Right.
Do you want to just talk a little bit maybe either about your personal graduate school journey leading into Q? We can get into the Q stuff later.
Sure. So I graduated from my undergrad degree and I spent a year living in Turkey as a Fulbright scholar. And after that, worked for 2 years at a high school teaching, and then decided I would go to grad school. So I applied for Notre Dame, got into the MTS program at Notre Dame, and did that for 2 years. And used some of that time to discern what it was that I wanted to do professionally after that. While working at Notre Dame, though, I had a job at the place on campus, the designated spot on campus for helping students discern grad school and then practically apply for grad school or fellowships, grants, and things like that. So spent a lot of time looking over a lot of applications and helping a bunch of students think through the process of graduate school, and then also actually helping them get into or apply for graduate school. So.
And Ryan here is an undergraduate.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe you'd kick it off with maybe just a primary initial question in terms of that grad school journey.
Yeah, I think just sort of the first thing that I hear, and I guess from your experience also, there's all these different options. Should you take sort of 2 or 3 years to work and then go back to grad school? I hear all this talk about the longer you spend away from school, the less likely you are to go back. There's also these options of Fulbright, like you did. So sort of, what's sort of what are the options, and what would you recommend if you're thinking about going to grad school, but you want to try other things, or sort of what would you recommend when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things about graduate school that's funny is it's oftentimes seen as the alternative. Like I can continue doing the thing that I'm doing right now, or I can go to grad school. And I don't know that people always have the most. I think it would serve people to be imaginative as they consider the many options there are for somebody. I know for me, applying for and doing the Fulbright gave me a lot of kind of merged academic / work experience that I was grateful for. And as I reflect on my own experience, I wasn't totally sure after I graduated if I wanted to go to grad school. And I think that the time that I spent working was extremely valuable. There might be, the language of the longer time you spend out of school, the less likely you are to go to graduate school, posits going to graduate school is the ultimate goal, right? And therefore staying outside of the academic system as a negative, right? But I think people probably they wind up not going to grad school because they find they're fulfilled in other arenas. But for me, even just as a grad student, I think having that work experience made me a way better graduate student, because I became much more conscious of how precious time is, or how nice it is to learn. I developed a much more adult routine by having a job. So for me, and then I also had savings. It was nice to be able to dip into savings when I was running low on cash, or for Christmas or travel or things like that. So for me, I'm really grateful that I worked for a couple of years and grad school is also a great thing to have in your back hip pocket if you need to maybe leave a work environment you don't love. Nobody can cast aspersions on you for seeking higher education. So
I'm just curious. I'm indulging my curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and so you mentioned, you kind of referenced your own grad school experience. And you got a master's in theology. And I think that's more in that direction of academia, pursuing, either teaching on your own in the end, maybe just personal enrichment. And then I know there's also more professional graduate degrees as well.
Right.
Should that factor into your decision, as Ryan mentioned, in terms of taking time off? I imagine if you want to go to medical school, you should go to medical school, no questions asked, because you're not going to be able to be a doctor without it.
Right.
But yeah, do you want to maybe get into some of those different... We don't have to dwell too long on those minutiae.
I think about, maybe in my mind, there's a division between... there's pre-professional degrees, which would be like getting your JD, your law degree, or your MD, your medical degree. And a PhD in a certain sense is also a pre-professional degree. It's just preparing you for a career in research. Normally that's in the academy, but it could also be somewhere else. The academic PhD, what one does with the academic PhD is research and defend an answer to a question that has not yet been answered before in some particular field. So, if there's sort of a burning lacuna in an area of scholarship that you're very familiar with and you think that you have it in you to answer that question, that's prime PhD material, right? But that's the PhD world. The JD and the MD, they give you the ability to practice a certain craft in a sort of guild-like way. In a certain way, all of these things are outgrowths of the old guild system. You have to have a license that enables you to operate within the field that other experts operate in. The division is interesting, though, because with the JD or the MD, you're not guaranteed, but you're more or less guaranteed a very high-paying job. With a pre-professional degree in the PhD world, once you have that degree, that field it can be tricky, right, to land a job there where you're specifically going to be using that degree. So that's where I think that there's a little bit more hesitance around maybe getting your PhD in areas like I don't PhD in history or a PhD in theology. Like, you've got to be pretty sure that you're interested in working in, say, the academy or the church or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For this, just maybe another brief degree that I think in my research is the most popular choice for graduate school. And you didn't mention it, so I thought we could just talk about that briefly, is the MBA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That seems to be the one that people really frequently go back to school for. And I can't tell, it doesn't seem to have in that JD, MD track an obvious career choice right after.
Right.
And also you are a business owner.
That's
so,
true.
Maybe you have some insight onto an MBA and why that's such a popular choice. Is it worth it?
Yeah. Well, and then with master's degrees, the big distinction would be that you're not going to be like pushing the field of scholarship further. Rather, you're going to be widely educated in whatever field you just picked. So even if you get a PhD in history, say, you're going to do about 10 credit hours, or 10 courses or so of coursework. Even if you don't go on to ultimately receive the PhD, you're still going to get a master's degree, which will indicate this is a person who is well trained in this field. So an MBA works similarly. You maybe will have a thesis, but ultimately what the master's degree shows it's not that you pushed research forward, but it's that you're specialized and have a body of specialized knowledge. So an MBA would say you know more than your average person about how business administration works. So an MBA or a master's degree generally and a PhD operate sort of on two different tracks. One indicates that you're very familiar with the field, and the other that you're the leading scholar in a particular area of a field.
Yeah. And I know for some of those, like a master's, like an MBA, maybe a master's of teaching, often people think that will come with a pay raise or maybe being considered for a higher paid job. Is that something you consider worth pursuing through a master's?
I think so. Though there's a kind of trade-off that I think it's important to do. There is opportunity cost, right? So if you don't pursue a master's degree, let's say, that's 2 more years that you would be in your job 2 more years of pay raises, 2 more years of credentials there, 2 more years of seniority. And there's a universe in which, well, maybe you would receive a significant pay raise, but will that be worth, A, the lack of income for those 2 years, and B, the lack of additional sort of experience with a particular place that you're interested in. So I think that's one of the biggest things that people should weigh before going to graduate school. Like, if you like your job, if you enjoy your job, you enjoy the career path that you're on, there's a universe in which to take 2 years off can sort of slow you down. But at the same time, there are certain skills that just can't be learned elsewhere. Like I run a business. I really wish I had an MBA. There's so many things that I've got friends doing MBAs, and if they talk about the stuff that they're learning, it's just on a very practical level, it's awesome to know.
Yeah. You're looking at your finances, trying to dip back into your master's in theology. It's not computing.
Yeah. Hold on. The Chalcedonian definition had something to do with this. Yeah.
I know you were wondering too about skills you can learn in school and skills you can learn outside of school. How can you, without going, actually know?
Yeah, I think it's just the field I want to go into is film. So sort of in the realm of film, but also in business or anything like that, how would you sort of weigh being in the industry and learning through doing rather than learning through being in a classroom?
Yeah. Or even in the case of film, and I don't know about business or some other fields, some people make the argument of even getting in the industry in the first place.
Sure.
Like, especially if you're trying to get at a higher level, like film school being that avenue.
Right.
But obviously that's very specialized. But in terms of this weighing practical experience and classroom experience, without knowing, like, how are you supposed to make that decision?
Yeah. I think one of the, there's a big place for the interior longings of one's like soul. I don't know. On some level, that there's a role for that. And then related, and perhaps in a different way, is funding. There's a universe in which, when I think about some of the MFA programs, I remember having a brief period thinking about MFA programs, being very interested in doing that, and realizing these funded programs. The big difference for me almost everywhere is like funded versus unfunded. A funded program, in essence, kind of buys you that time. Like, when I think about it, if you're able to do a funded if you're able to fund your graduate studies, then a lot of the downsides kind of go away, right? You've got that support and you've got that time. It becomes a little less harrowing to have to support yourself as you're in the place, so you can focus on the art as you're learning about the art in the classroom. That seems really important to me. It would seem for the fine arts, one of the questions that I remember asking advisees would just be like, are you doing this right now? Like, is this something that you spend your free time doing? Or do you have a job doing this? Or are you engaged in ways other than sort of as a passive mental stop holder in this activity? And if the answer is yes, right, then it seems to me that there's a compelling reason to go and be able to be in a space where you are surrounded by other people doing the same thing, talking about doing those things. And at that point, one really wants to, it would seem to me one should work out the monetary side of things. But even there, I think waiting isn't bad, right? Having a corpus of work that you maybe spent your evenings working on while working your standard postgraduate job, that other people there can critique, or that you can bring to a professor. That seems to me to be an awesome thing to have. Yeah. But if you know yourself well enough to know, hey, I'm not really going to do that. I'm gonna nap after work or whatever. Maybe reconsider. But it does seem to me through these master's programs, like, if you find yourself with a deep curiosity and a deep desire to know more, and if you find it actually absorbing some of your time, then pursue it.
When you had students come to you, and obviously you have that spiel about funded versus non-funded, if they were really, resolute on even paying for grad school, did you have any advice there, how to balance the cost and benefit of that? Is that just a no-go in terms of whether?
Well, I guess it depends a little bit on the program. For one of the pre-professional programs where you will receive a license to practice, I think pay. You're going to have to pay. For law school, for medical school, those are fields where, it's going to be necessary probably to pay. Most PhDs are funded because there's an understanding that you can't pursue, you can't do the work that a PhD entails and also at the same time work a full-time job. So that's taken care of. You're left then with other programs that maybe you have to pay out of pocket in order to engage with. And that, it does feel kind of sketchy for me. I know when I was going through my application process, I decided to only apply for funded programs. And I think that there are a couple of things going on there. Like, if the school is going to support you as a student, the school has a vested financial interest in your performance. Versus, I think in a lot of master's programs, there can be almost predatory practices by some schools where they recognize that, hey, this is a cash cow, where we have these people that are coming in, they're going to pay us a ton of money. This is going to give us, the school, access to federal student loans by way of these students. We're not on the hook for how they perform or what they do. And so one of the really, which this isn't to say that funded programs are all bad, of course not. But one of the ways to just determine very quickly whether or not a program is going to, whether there's going to be institutional investment in you as a student is to see whether or not there's literal financial investment in you as a student. Mm-hmm. So I think looking for funded programs is a good way to begin a search, or narrow down a search. I think paying out of pocket makes it a lot harder and introduces a lot of additional stresses into your sort of life as student. So.
Are there any specific sites or tools just on a really practical level for doing searching for graduate school programs?
There are a lot of great, a couple of places that I would start is by, rather than using an aggregator, there are like US News and World Report aggregates different rankings of different programs, and that's useful. I think some of the more interesting students or more interesting applicants will identify particular departments that are doing interesting work or individual scholars that are doing interesting work. And then that in turn gives you a much more compelling application, right? If you say, I'm super interested in the way that, say, Gabriel Said Reynolds here at Notre Dame is studying the emergence of Islam, and it's something that is not happening anywhere else, then you can be assured that like that program is going to be a program where your interests are met because the scholars that are interested in your areas are there and at that school. So I think we'd start with thinking through ranking. Ranking is great. Think about ranking. That aggregates a lot of detail that you would otherwise have to find yourself, but also asking yourself, where are the scholars that I like or the scholars that I want to follow? Where did they go? Where are they? If they're graduates of programs that you look up to, I also think that's a helpful way. Like as I imagine doing an MFA, for instance, I think like, is there any sort of common denominator in the filmmakers that I see, like recent filmmakers, that they all go to one particular place? Mm-hmm. And that gives you a compelling reason to look into an institution.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess sort of on that topic of exploring different programs to discern, when it comes to like getting to know those programs, mm-hmm. do you do like college visits? That kind of brings me back to like late high school during my fall mm-hmm. break going on the college visit road trip. Is that something that you do? Do you meet with those departments individually to ask them questions? Do you go on the campus tour with all the undergrads? What's sort of the deal with that?
Yeah, it's much less. Okay. There's much less of that simply because it is not offering to you like an entire coherent self-contained lifestyle, but a pretty specific set of things. So I know for law school, typically that's not done. For PhD programs, they'll often, there's mutual discernment that takes place. And so there's almost always an interview process where you'll be invited to campus to meet scholars and things like that. But I think the standard procedure is not to schedule campus visits or things like that. If anything, there'll be a series of interviews and you can figure out what's going on there. But it doesn't hurt to go and hang out. I know when I was applying here, I emailed some professors when I was visiting, passing through town, and just check things out, talk to some students. And that seems like a good thing to do, but it's not understood to be as important as it is in the undergraduate.
Okay. You don't need to book a flight out to some place to check out the department or anything.
No, not necessarily. Yeah.
And if I'm guessing that PhD thing, hopefully they'll pay for that.
Yeah. Yeah, usually they do. Like, you'll be invited out, they'll put you up for a weekend, they'll wine and dine you, and then.
So it seems like in the graduate realm, to differentiate it from the undergrad, you're a little further along the application process before you're maybe visiting some of these places. Mm-hmm. Versus I remember when I was in high school, I was just at some campuses I never even applied to. I just like walked around, took the tour.
Yeah. Just to check it out, see what's going on.
But I guess it's a bigger investment, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like we've moved a little bit more into the how. So we're we're past that check mark. Are you going to go? Yes. How does that, you kind of were referencing this a little bit with making it compelling by identifying specific professors, researchers, departments, whatever it is. When with your work at Q's, did you ever feel like there was one piece of advice you were always giving in terms of crafting that? Is there some line that you have or some rule?
Yeah. One of the biggest things for applicants is to recognize that like you don't know that your life comprises a compelling story. Very often, if somebody else takes a look at like the extracurriculars you did, the classes you took, the papers you wrote, you'll begin to notice there are certain themes that are there. You'll find yourself always returning to a question of how does A relate to B, or how does X relate to Y? And figuring out what your own story is, figuring out how to self-narrativize and turn yourself from like, I am a person who would like a master's degree, into like, as a scholar, I have historically been interested in the way that minority populations relate to and engage with like a larger supermajority that they're not a part of through their religious. Once you can take your own story from, I am a smart person looking to become smarter, to, I have a goal for myself, and your institution will be the institution that best helps me achieve that goal, then you've done it, right? The image I'm always using is one of like like crossing a river or something like this, right? If what you can do is say like, I'm halfway through, all my experiences, all my research, all my contacts, all my professional engagement has led me here, and I need this other stepping stone in order to get to that bank. If you can identify that bank, and you can say to the grad school, you're the best next stepping stone, then you create this aura of inevitability. Like, I've come this far. I know I'm going to get that bank. You're the best person to help me get to that bank. So, very often I think applications get that a little confused, and the other bank becomes graduate school itself, But if the goal is just graduate school, quad graduate school in an application, it doesn't play. If the goal is to answer a research question or more fully investigate something, all of a sudden then I think the school feels much more compelled to aid you.
Yeah. Well, I remember you had, once you were explaining to someone about graduate school and this application process, you had this idea of a story or momentum.
Yeah.
And this idea of this, you're kind of making it seem like, oh, I'm going to succeed. I'm interesting.
Totally.
I'm doing cool things. If you want to be a part of that, you should let me into your graduate school.
Right. Like you obviously don't have to, but yeah.
Because I imagine a lot of the applications they are getting are in the sense of like, I'm really accomplished.
Right.
And I want to accomplish graduate school.
Right. And that is a little bit of a carryover from the undergrad application process to the graduate application process, where I think the undergraduate applicant is considered much more holistically, right? Where it is more important in graduate school that you have a candidate who is driven, has a focus, and is going to accomplish that focus. So if they can articulate what that is, that's a really important first step for determining whether or not a student should be admitted. And if you're in a position where you're like, I don't, especially if applying for like a PhD program, if you're thinking like, I don't know exactly what my question is or how I want to answer it, well, that would be the first step. Take a step back and really think through like, what is the question I want to answer? And the thing is, if one doesn't come immediately to mind, it's not that you're not a viable candidate for grad school. No. It's just that you probably haven't done the time, like put in the time to like really think through what it is you're after. But there almost always, with everyone I advise, is some sort of question there or something that can be determined. But it takes a little bit of working to figure out what that is.
I think just the big thing I was wondering was how, like, what's sort of the time frame? And I know there's all these, sometimes you have to take tests for certain grad programs. Yeah. When do you start taking those? When do you start really seriously looking at programs, prepping for your application? When should you expect to hear back? Should you look for jobs and apply to grad school? And then can you weigh both options? So what's sort of the timetable when it comes to this?
The nitty gritty.
Yeah. It tends to be about the same as it is for undergraduate, though move back a little bit further. If I remember, normally the application period would close in December or early January. And so, you'd spend summer and fall kind of getting those applications put together. There is some graduate schools will invite you to take a test to determine how well you'll operate, and people will often study for these very intensely. This is, I guess, if there's another little like hack, don't do that. Many of these tests exist for the sake of determining if you are above a certain bar, and if you are, it's not considered at all. Unlike the ACT or the SAT, where it's like, hey, if you're at 33 and not 32, that really does something for you. It doesn't work in the same way. In most graduate school admissions offices, it's mostly like, hey, are you above a 50th percentile in math? If so, great.
Yeah.
And then it goes on from there.
Okay.
That to me, somehow this seems like a strangely tragic oversight where like people bust their brains trying to like get a perfect score on like the math section for their
GRE.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying as long as you can hit a certain threshold, they kind of look at all the applications, they throw out those ones that are below there,
right?
And then they forget about the score completely.
Then they're going to be looking at the more particular questions. So it's not something that's going to help you a ton if you like get 4 points higher. So rather than dedicating the time, and this is a mistake I made, I like mastered all these stupid flashcards way back in the day when whatever, because like the school admissions grift is strong, and they're not, people selling you flashcards for vocab aren't going to tell you not to do it. But that time is way better spent drafting a really nice application statement.
Okay.
Do you have any advice in terms of drafting an academic statement? We've kind of covered some of the story, self-narrativized element.
Yeah, do kind of get comfortable with presenting yourself as a character interested in particular questions. Think of a way to stand out. I often when advising, I'll try to figure out like a really, really funny, punchy way to open. That these documents tend to be sort of dry, but if you can have a really interesting, quick little vignette right at the get-go, that it touches on what you're interested in, that helps. It creates a sort of shorthand. The applications committees tend to refer to applicants, and as I was on application committees, I found it always funny how like if somebody had an incredibly cool story or opening or vignette or something, they became attached to that in a certain way. Like it's a very powerful, positive thing to have something that your identity is fused to at the get-go.
Yeah.
I think I opened mine saying like recounting. It was just like an open quotation, and then this guy being like, Christianity is just a modern form of Greek paganism, which was like, ooh, edgy,
And then you get identified, because I'm imagining if they're on a committee and they're discussing and they're trying to remember who's who, they can be like the guy who said
Greek paganism guy. Yeah. I think that's like another sort of small, quiet way to put yourself forward well. But there's that, and then there's also like not walking away from what you've accomplished. This is a huge thing. Is like it's good to be humble in the lunchroom, about your accomplishments, and use the passive voice. I was awarded, like, oh wow, I've been so blessed to have received this scholarship, but that language just doesn't play. Like in a application, if you can only pick one mode of speech for the rest of your life, use the lunchroom. I was blessed, yada yada. But don't use that language in an application, right? You actually do have access to both modes of speech, and say like, I applied for and won the yada yada fellowship. Be willing to claim for yourself all the glory you have legitimately won. That's the other big thing.
Okay, so I think we've kind of covered a lot of the basics. I don't know if you had any other burning.
That's all I have.
Burning questions. Are there any last things we didn't cover? Any quick tips? Things that you're just like, you got to know this. If you're going to take anything away from this podcast.
Quick tips. You have to know this. I think graduate schools is great. I did a master's degree. It was funded, which I think was really, really helped me focus. And since that time, I didn't go into academia. I started a business in a field that's like sort of unrelated to what I studied. But even with all that considered, I'm so grateful that I had the chance to spend those 2 years sharpening my capacities for critical thinking and research. So, lest I come off as a like, hey, don't go to grad school unless it's totally fun. I understand I've been sort of negative on it, but there is, even if you don't wind up using the skills that you went to graduate school for or don't go on further, there is a lot to be said about the kind of thinking one learns how to do in graduate school. And that has been super valuable to me. So, there are a lot of benefits that exist there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think even in my case, sometimes this is a little bit of a distraction from what you were saying, but that sense of pushing things off or just not being sure of what to do, but having curiosity and wanting that sort of enrichment. So I think, I don't know, it's good to hear even I think it's good to hear all the negatives of like, hey, don't do it unless this, and this.
Yeah.
To sort of weed out like, or am I just doing this because my deep interior landscape?
Yeah. Well, yeah. One thing I'm thinking about this too, like, often I've advocated for the funded programs, and you raised the good question, like, well, what if that's not panning out for me? Another thing worth maybe doing, right, is like once you've identified the funded programs, apply. If you don't get in, think, what would make me a better candidate? Like, what are the specific things I can do in the next 2 years? And then do those things for 2 years and then reapply. Okay. You know?
Can you ask programs? Is that like
what do you mean?
If you don't get in, is it weird to ask them why or what can I do? Is that considered a bad move?
Well, you know, I think one of the hard things is that oftentimes
they're gonna be like a little desperate.
Well, I think year to year there's such a big difference in who applies, you know. Mm-hmm. So it might be the case where like, hey, if you'd applied again in the following year, you would have gotten it, right?
Yeah, I have heard that they'll take like it can be all the difference between taking one extra person in the program,
right,
or one fewer, and that can be all the difference whether you get in or not. Yeah.
The numbers are so much smaller than in the undergraduate setting that like those kinds of questions, you know, maybe in the undergrad context, they could say like, well, if your ACT score had been 2 points higher, you would have like, our formula would have spat out a green light instead of a red light. And it makes a little more sense. But with graduate programs, they really are looking for you as an individual person and the things that you've done. So one of the ways of indicating that like, hey, yeah, I definitely am an awesome candidate is by doing things in your own time, in your own spare time, that indicate that you've got this kind of burning desire to pursue the questions you're interested in, which by extension creates that aura of inevitability, which makes you a really attractive candidate. So, you know, I think a really good strategy is to identify good programs that provide ample funding, craft a compelling narrative, and even if you don't make it in, like think, how can I present myself differently or more compellingly, or how can I do the kinds of things that they would look at as being what a good graduate student would do? And if you want to do those things, you're a good match anyway, so go ahead and do them. And if you don't want to do them, reinvestigate your desire to go to graduate school. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great way to end things. Thanks so much for coming on, Evan.
Nice.
Again.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, hopefully, if you've listened to both Evan Gage episodes, you've got friends. You know if you can go to grad school.
If you're going to leave those friends.
Yeah, that'll be the next time.
Yeah. How to lose friends.
Yeah.
After college.
We should have called that first episode how to make friends and influence people after college. I feel like should have been the title. And thanks to Ryan for coming on, co-hosting. Yeah, cool. I hope you learned something.
I did. Thank you so much.
What a compelling experience for a graduate school application.
Yeah.
Man.
Wow. What a great thing to put on my portfolio.
Yeah. Went on a podcast, how to go to grad school. And thanks to everybody listening. We appreciate you. We love you all. I don't know. Maybe. Goodbye.
Don't Say Adulting is a Grotto Network podcast produced by Jane O'Connor, Kevin DeClute, and Josh Long. Additional production and editing done by Kevin DeClute. Graphics and animation by Becky Rogers. Grotto Network is Director Javi Zubizarreta, Senior Producer Josh Long, Senior Content Editor Jesse McCartney, Art Director Becky Rogers, Senior Manager for Community Engagement Mike Rossetti, Social Media Manager Adrian Giraldi, Web Content Strategist Michaela Douglas, Producer Kevin DeClute, Associate Producer Jane O'Connor. Special thanks to our guest and Notre Dame Studios.